there has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. Whether you're ready to start, restart, or re-energize your vegan or plant-based practice, this podcast is for you. I'm Michelle Olander, life coach, vegan, ADHD matriarch, travel lover, and smoothie loather. And I know that it's the details that get in the way of your vegan journey. But I like to believe that the obstacle is always the way. So every week we meet here where I translate the tools of life coaching and Stoic philosophy. I bring you actionable tips, some laughs, interesting guests, and vegan ideas for everyone at any age. All to help you veg your best. Welcome back, my Veg Your Bestie. Welcome to September. Hope it didn't sneak up on you. Hope you're feeling prepared for what I call the other new year. And September begins what I think is for many of you, many of us, the busiest season of the year. So to celebrate or get us off to a great start, we are tackling today one of those cuisines, one of those travel destinations that people often point to as not all that vegan friendly. And that's the cuisine of Northern Europe. And in fact, one of my best friends is winging her way to the Arctic as this podcast goes live in September, heading to Iceland and Greenland with a friend who is vegetarian. And they are bringing snacks and anticipating it being a little bit tricky, especially in Greenland. And I'm hoping to get a report from them when they return. So today's guest, Sunny Gandara, is not only a classically trained chef. Sunny is a native of Northwest Norway, and you're going to hear today how she transitioned her food blog, Arctic Grub, dedicated to the cuisine of Northern Europe, to a plant-based blog translating the flavors and the culture of Scandinavia to reflect her personal vegan journey. Now, I know this is an issue many of you listeners are fascinated by when our vegan values seem to be at odds with our work or our traditions. So we're going to hear about how Sunny navigated that. And she's also going to talk about her work as a food professional, how she became a proponent of what she calls NorVegan cuisine, and how being Fjord to table does not have to include sea animals. Now, Sunny will talk about the classes and the recipes she has for you, as well as a special offer just for Veg Your Best listeners, which you'll be able to find in the show notes. And I think you're going to love listening to Sunny. I think you'll be inspired to bring some Scandinavian flavors and notes into your food this fall and winter. So please listen to Sunny, and I'll be back on the other side. Sunny Gandara, Arctic Grub. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Did I say that right? ArcticGrub.com. Is that you?
Yes, that is me.
That's incredible. I've been looking at your beautiful website, and I learned about you very recently through Ellen Canner, who was on the show a couple years ago, the luminous goddess-like Ellen Canner, who I think she walks on water. I just adore her. And she, as well as you, are a member of a group called Les Dames d'Escoffier, a professional chefs culinary group. And I'm wondering if you tell us, before we get started, about your vegan journey and the work you do, what are Les Dames d'Escoffier?
So Les Dames is a non-for-profit organization that supports women in hospitality. So you have a bunch of different women in there, and we're always expanding to different areas of hospitality. So we have, of course, chefs. We have people who are who teach cooking classes like me online. You have wine directors, sales directors in the wine and food industry. You have even my friend Jennifer, who is a flower farmer. So, we are really just expanding to support women in hospitality in general. So we do a lot of wonderful things. We have a yearly where we raise scholarships for women who need some financial support, and we put on a lot of different events. And it's all voluntary, all because we really want to support each other in this otherwise a tough industry for women.
Now, you are like Ellen, you're vegan, and you are someone who is a professionally trained chef. And your particular specialty is the food of the northern end of Europe, and you're Norwegian. So I'm wondering if you'll just tell us to start a little bit about your vegan journey and then how wackiness ensued. And you're now this fantastic Norwegian culinary vegan expert.
Yeah, sure. So I believe I've always been vegan, but at heart, I grew up with lots of animals. Animals were my friends. I grew up with siblings who were much older than me. So my friends, I lived in a remote village in Norway, not a lot of people, kids my age. So I had goats, I had ducks, I had tons of cats and horses. And, like anybody else, we get conditioned sometimes to, we eat meat and fish. And so my whole life I've been eating, I call myself a nose to tail chef because I was also a professionally trained cook at the Institute of Culinary Education. But when I had my catering company, Fork and Glass, with my husband, we were cooking regular meat dishes and normal fare, if you will. And then I remember I was in the kitchen, and I think I was even like terrible to think about now, but I was butchering a chicken, and I looked outside, and it was this very sort of idyllic farm where you just had a few animals grazing, kind of like what you hope animals have, what kind of life they have. And I saw this chicken, and the chicken made eye contact with me. And it just was this profound moment where I was like, wow, how disassociated have I become to just kind of not think about this life that I was just, butchering. And then this personality is looking at me like no different than my dogs and my cats. And that's what sort of planted the seed. But by then I'd already started my blog, Arctic Grub. So I started it back in 2011 when I started to get homesick. After a while, I was like, the sort of mysticism of New York and the excitement was kind of like, yeah, I've been here for a long time, and now I'm kind of craving the fjords of Norway, and especially my home cooking, my mom's home cooking. So I started it as a non-vegan blog, starting to write about the classic dishes, but not just giving people recipes, but really talking about why do we eat the way we do in Norway, right? So that was what really kind of sparked interest, and I gained a very big following, and it was only my hobby. And then in 2013, which is hard to believe it's over a decade ago, I just finally said, I can't do this anymore. I have to stop eating meat. So initially I was like, I'm going to continue eating eggs. And I wanted to start slowly, but I really did it for the animals because I made the connection. I didn't feel like I could look at myself in the mirror anymore and eat animals. But I was also really scared that I would lose all of these followers that I had, amassed. And a lot of them were it's an older generation in the Midwest, Minnesota and Wisconsin, very traditional group of people. But I was like, well, it is what it is. I'm going to announce that this now is going to be a Nordic vegan blog, or as I like to call it, a NorVegan blog. And funnily enough, I will have to say, I think 99% decided to stay. They were very supportive. There was an older, I can't forget this. It was an older grandmother who was like, oh, my granddaughter is vegan, and now I can cook for her. And now I can show her, that we can still eat from our, culture and still not have to cook with meat, dairy, and eggs. And that's what really sort of catapulted me to start full time, actually. And I worked Arctic Grub full time for several years. I'm back to doing it part time now, but it's a blog that I will never, I think, let go of, because it is so important to me, and to see that people are interested in, and especially now the younger generation who are more interested in finding, not just because of veganism, but they want to learn how to make more sustainable dishes, right? and eat less meat and less fish. So it's really a welcoming page for anybody who wants to just learn more about Nordic food. The criteria I have is that, be open to different things, but also for me, the criteria is it has to remind me of the dishes I grew up with. And my mom was a fantastic cook. And I also have a chef husband who is very not critical of me, but he has high standards when it comes to food, and he's not vegan, so he's my tester on all the dishes that I do. So I'm very happy with the development of it. There's very few blogs now in English that talks about vegan Nordic food, but it's coming, but it's still a very new field.
Well, it means you're the expert. It means you're the expert in that area. And I love that you said that originally you were kind of nose to tail, and now your page says Fjord to fork.
Yes, exactly. And, the fjord, what I gather from the fjord is not fish, rather a lot of seaweed, more sustainable things that we can do with that. And, when I say fjord, it's really because I'm from Fjord, the fjord country. And so that was really what started Arctic Grub. It was like food from the fjords, and people were very fascinated with it. There's a lot of tourists coming to that region every year. But looking back historically, yes, Norwegians ate a lot of seafood, right? Because we have such a huge coastline, as you can see on the map, and a lot of people sustain themselves by fishing. I come from a family. My grandmother's husband, or my grandfather rather, owned a fish factory, and my uncle was a fisherman. So it is a long history of that. But other than that, there wasn't really a lot of, like, even me growing up, and I'll date myself now, in the 70s and 80s when I grew up, we didn't eat a lot of meat as we do now in Norway. It has changed there too, unfortunately. But, it was really more of a rare occurrence. So I want to go back to really finding out, like, how can we eat seasonally? How can we eat local? There's a lot of foraging that's fantastic in the Nordic regions, of berries and mushrooms. And there's so many wonderful things that we can have to use and be creative, and not just automatically grab that steak or that salmon, but if you wanted to, I also have vegan versions of that as well.
I saw that. I saw you have a class on making a fish style Norwegian meal. But start with in terms of your, so historically, I think sometimes people, let me take this back. I think sometimes people think that to go vegan is to turn your back on your culture or your tradition, or people like your family members who may have been hunters, who may have been farmers, who may have been fishermen, and, backbreaking work and tremendous care given to the work that they were doing sustainably many times, not all, but many of them very, very conscientious about the way they treated their natural resources. And I think sometimes people are offended, or we worry that they'll be offended when we say, no more for me, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that is, I get a lot of comments sometimes on my blog, like, don't call it bacalao, if it doesn't have fish, and, this isn't classic and traditional. And so you have those people, and I understand that reaction of, don't take away my food memory, because, don't disrespect my grandmother's meatballs, whether you're from Norway or Italy. And I understand that. And I try to come at it with an open mind of, it's not necessarily the ingredients that we are thinking about, right? It's really the memories associated with it. When it comes to somebody's livelihood, farmers and things like that, there are always options. I never said you should just close down your farm or not, make money going out to sea. But there have been many instances where I've seen fishermen now are actually the sea, as ocean, as is robbed of fish. I mean, we're probably going to have extinguished the sea soon. So why not go to something more sustainable? Like I mentioned before, seaweed, or, if you have a farm something more like crops, versus, animals. But, you have to also think about, back in the day, we didn't consume meat in the enormous amounts that we do today. There was no factory farming back in Norway then, so then you could have maybe looked at it as a sustainable practice, right? Even though as vegans, we don't want to see any animals die, but at least that was a more natural way of living amongst animals. But now, unfortunately, with the increasing amounts of people on this planet, even if you wanted to, it wouldn't be possible to have grass-fed beef for everybody. It's just not a sustainable model. So I try to find, I actually started another brand called the Plant Curious Table, and that was really about attracting people who just wanted to eat vegan, like maybe 2 or 3 times a week, like just getting that started, that seed planted. And the same with Arctic Grub. Is like, I don't judge anybody if they're still eating meat, dairy, and eggs. I did that for 40 years. So who would I be to all of a sudden now be, the judge and jury, right? But it's really about making it more like opening people's eyes to see like Nordic food doesn't have to be just smoked salmon and reindeer steak and, creamy desserts. We can still have creamy desserts and it be vegan. But so it's just really about changing people's perception, and that does take time, and some people are open to it and others are not, and that's okay. I'm not for everybody, but I think I can't think of one person who has, and now I'm bragging, but who has tasted my food and say, ugh. Most of them are like, I can't believe this is vegan. And it's like, if I could cook like this, or if I could eat like this, I would be vegan in a split second. And that's kind of what fuels me to continue, because that's why I do all these cooking classes, to teach you how easy it can be to make a really classic Nordic meal with plant-based ingredients.
So the other issue with Norway is it is Northern Europe with a short growing season, and understandably, animal products and fish products were things that were available more year round, or could be smoked or cured or put away in some method. How as vegans, as plant forward people, do we use the seasons in these northern climates, like near the Arctic? What become the new staples?
It's not unlike here, because, eating with the seasons means just like you're eating what is most nutritionally, higher nutrients, and of course available. So a lot of root vegetables in the wintertime. So potatoes and turnips and parsnips and carrots and all of that stuff. And there's so much you can do with that. You can create these creamy cheeses from potatoes and carrots, and you can do so many different things. When people think vegetables, they think just like, oh, I'm just going to steam them and eat them as a side, right? But, this is the whole thing, is opening up to creative ways to cook with different vegetables. Yes, it is definitely more challenging in Norway to eat a wider variety of vegetables all year round. But actually, I live in New York. I would never eat tomatoes or eggplant in December. I just don't do it. And if you're looking into like really what the body needs, we are meant to change up our diet, but with now, of course, in Norway too, today, if you're talking 2024, we have mangoes, we have pineapple, we have all kinds of food from all over the globe. But then again, you start to think about sustainability, right? And your carbon footprint. So I think that just being creative with, making things from lentils, legumes, things like that you can actually like have and in dried form, that's kind of like the plant-based curing and things like that. We can can a lot of things. That's what my mom did in the fall and the late or early late summer. We would just can all of our fruits, and we have 2 months where we have everything like plums and berries and fruits and vegetables. And my mom would just pickle them and she would can them, and we would enjoy those throughout the seasons. So that is really what I'm passionate about, is to teach people how to do that, so we can become sustainable in a more natural way, and not just think about eating foods from the other side of the world that's probably lost like 50% of its nutrient content by the time it arrives on your plate anyway. So but I think in today's society, it's really difficult because people always want things quick, and they just want to pick something up around the corner or have something delivered. And unfortunately, we see the results of people, including in Norway, being sicker and more overweight than ever before. So that is why I do, again, these cooking classes, to just show people like, get back in touch with nature, get back in touch with your body, to eat the way you're supposed to eat. And hopefully that message comes through eventually.
Well, I saw on arcticgrub.com, I saw on your website, among other things, and also on your Instagram page, which is beautiful, that you take some of the berries and you make like a cordial. So that is something that you can last and get those nutritional elements from the summer into your winter when it's a dark winter night and you don't have a lot of fresh things.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a huge part of Nordic culture because, even before in the old days when they didn't have refrigerators and stuff, which why they were digging things into the ground and also freezing and curing and drying and things like that. And I think it's wonderful, I think, and it just brings a different flavor profile rather than eating things fresh. So it mixes it up and it becomes almost like a savory, like umami flavor to it. If you're talking about like doing it, smoking and drying vegetables, for instance, you can do that with. And then, of course, we have mushrooms, which is fantastic. It's Nordic countries are huge in foraging for mushrooms. We have the best chanterelles in the world. Of course, that's very luxurious. But if you can find it in the forest, that's fantastic. And that is so meaty. And you can create steaks from it. You can create like pulled, quote unquote, pork, and all of these things. So, I mean, honestly, like the limit is only in your imagination. There's so much available to us. And, in terms of herbs and all these different things that we can be creative with in the kitchen.
I also always think that it gives us so much more respect and sensitivity for our actual human lives on this planet when we do without a little bit, or when we pull something dried that my mother-in-law used to, she was Polish. I'm half Polish. My husband's all Polish. And we used to, she used to put a needle of thread through the mushrooms and dry them. And she'd have them in her pantry, just these threads, almost like a garland of mushrooms that were drying. And then she'd pull them out at Christmas time. And so you would have that sense of summer and fall right there in the middle of a dark night.
Yes.
And it just makes you appreciate that human being functioning on planet Earth.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's my style of cooking. It's my style of being and living. And the older I get, the more I see the need for people to get back in touch with that type of eating and living, just so that we respect, our body knows what it needs. It's much smarter than we think it is, right? It'll tell us. And, the Nordic people have survived. And you see that especially even today, like in Iceland. So I have a cooking class on a trilogy series where I compare Norwegian food to Icelandic food, to Swedish food, and to Danish. I haven't done Finland, but that's not Scandinavia. Neither is Iceland, but, the Nordic countries. And Iceland is still a very isolated island, right? With not a lot of like trees or anything. So they do get very sort of stuck with the ocean, and that's why they're eating a lot of seafood. But even there has, you see this vegan movement starting. There's some vegan options now. I've heard people go to Reykjavik and they find, so there's, it's definitely a growing, but it's still difficult. I mean, if you travel there, it's difficult to just go to a small little village and be like, yeah, I want a vegan food. They're going to look at you like, yeah. So bigger cities is probably where it's at, but you'll see more and more vegan bloggers in Norway, which is really nice. And just being creative with the ingredients that they have available to them rather than rely on, again, those ingredients that come from abroad.
On your website, people can sign up to get a list of your 10 like standard recipes, like 10 recipes to try some of your work. I'm wondering if you would either talk about those or talk about 3 or 4 kind of Norwegian classics flavor profiles and what you've done with them, so we can kind of get a sense of what Norwegian food is, because many of us, myself included, don't have a lot of knowledge about it.
Yeah, so I think like, for instance, and I actually do want to give away something else, a freebie that is a combination of written recipes for your listeners and a little snippet of my cooking classes so you can get a sense, because I feel like sometimes some people are very visual learners and others are more, they want to read. So this you can get both, right? But in terms of recipes, so we are known as in Denmark as well and Sweden for open-faced sandwiches. These are really beautiful, ornate dishes, and most of them are made with fish or some type of fish and meat, right? And pickled herring, for instance. So in one of my recipes, I use eggplant and I use mushrooms instead of herring, and I just use the same pickling spices, and you would be amazed. And it's like, you don't have that really strong herring taste, which I don't miss anyway. But that is like something you put on top of the smoked salmon, which in instead of salmon, I use carrot, which I'm not the one who invented that. I'm sure you've seen that already, but roasting carrots and then just like putting it into some type of soy sauce with a little bit of like vegan fish sauce or some type of that. We're really just looking to recreate the flavor of the liquid so that it seeps into whatever main ingredient you're using. So, and then we use something called eggerøre, which is a Norwegian word for scrambled eggs, but it's more soft, in the pan, and it has like chives in it. So of course you can use products like just eggs, but you can also use tofu, and you just want to have like nice, good vegan butter in the pan and make it nice and decadent, and you wouldn't know the difference. It's just as delicious. So there's open-faced sandwiches you can go kind of wild with. There's also a pickled beets, of course, which is very traditional in Scandinavian food. So as long as you put some of those on there, you kind of get that sort of, this is like, I recognize this flavor, And then, of course, you have things like meatballs. Not the same as Swedish meatballs, but I do those too. And that's easier and easier to make now. You can, of course, make it from scratch using lentils and, again, the mushrooms, some nuts in there with all the different spices that we use, like nutmeg and cloves and things like very classic Nordic flavors, which sounds funny because it's a spice from the Far East, but that's another story. And then a nice gravy with boiled potatoes, pickled cucumbers, and of course, lingonberry, or if you don't have lingonberry, which you can find now here frozen, but you can use cranberry sauce. So that's a very classic dish as well. And then, more traditional, I would say more on the easy side, I find, is to veganize sweet foods like desserts and baked goods. So we have, of course, our cardamom buns, which are fantastic, and all kinds of different cakes. So there's so many different things. There's the cream cake, there's a marzipan cake. You can go from anything from very simple dishes to more elaborate, depending on what kind of occasion you're looking for. If you just want a Tuesday night dinner, or if you want to cook for Christmas, it's all there. So I think I've thought about almost everything. There's even one called the hunter stew, viltgryte, which I remember because actually my dad did hunt a little bit birds in the mountains when I was younger, and I wanted to make a Norwegian, like very classic vegan dish like that. It has a cream sauce, it has juniper berries in it, fresh herbs, and then of course foraging. Like, we are not going to go hunting in the mountains, we are going to go foraging for mushrooms and wild berries. And that's kind of putting that story together, just like we can still hang out with our parents or our friends or our family and do the same things. We just don't kill innocent birds or animals, and then let them live like they should. And then we can actually take just enough, don't take everything. If you find a nice spot for mushrooms, you always give back to nature, leave it. And then you have the same exact experience. And then with all the different spices and cream sauce, I didn't hear anyone complain in my house when I served it. So so that's what I call a success, because you really have to think about the connotations around food, right? You don't want to, again, what we were talking about before, you don't want to rob someone of their heritage or their experiences, their memories, and their bond with their family. But you want to, sort of introduce different, friendlier ways to enjoy food and cook as well.
Because it's the people and the connection. It's not the ingredient in the food. It's the sharing of the food. It's the, and I know so many people in, second, third generation Americans who remember their culture. Most of us, we're already not eating exactly what our grandparents ate. Our grandparents came here and they started to use what they could afford or what they could find, and they made do. And yes, we think of it as grandma's food, but it's not what great-grandmother made.
Absolutely. And that is funny you should say that, because I always get, food brings up so much passion in people. It's incredible. Like, I'll post this innocent picture of a strawberry dish and people will find ways to argue about it. I find it kind of hilarious, but people like, in my family, oh no, that's not how you do it. And I was like, well, I am from Norway, so I do think I remember how I did it, but yours maybe fourth or fifth generation. And like you said, things get muddled through the generations, and then people use whatever they have available to them, right? They don't have, for instance, one thing which is coming out this week is a recipe for cloudberry cream desserts. Can't find cloudberries here. These are like these orange berries They look like raspberries, but they're orange in color, and they only grow in the very north. And in Alaska, I think, is the only state here in the US, because they have very similar climate to us, but you find them in the mountains, and it's all wild, and they have a savory flavor. So, people make substitutions. Like you can find cloudberry jam here, instead. So people use that. So, but, again, it's like asking your Italian grandmother, like, what's the correct way to make ragu, you're not going to get like a million different answers. And the same with Norway, because we are divided by valleys and fjords and rivers and what have you. And there's so much cultural diversity, even in this. Norway's a pretty large country because we only have 5 million people, but it's a long, very long country. And the way they make meatballs in the north, or lefse is another very famous flatbread that we put sweet toppings on, like butter and sugar and things like that. I did a course on that. I also have online courses where you can learn about this very, very old, the oldest bread in Norway. And there, oh my gosh, that's when the discussions came, like, that's not the way you do it. You put potatoes in it. Well, you do it there in that region, you may use that. And, but it's interesting to hear. And I guess I'm grateful that people are passionate and interested in Norwegian cooking, because I had no idea there was so many Norwegian Americans here. So that's kind of very, very interesting. And no matter where in the country, there's always somebody with that background. So it's been a good way to connect with people.
And it's funny. It just is so human. I mean, I was a little girl with a lot of post-war Poles in diaspora, Poles in Chicago or New York or London or whatever. And they all fought about everything in terms of that you weren't making it right.
Yeah.
Your mother doesn't know what she's talking about. You would never do it that way.
Yeah.
And but it's what they have, of that memory, of that connection. When I heard about you, Sunny, I was thinking, this is an area so many of us have learned to veganize, or it's already vegan. Indian food, subcontinent food, Far Eastern food, Mexican food, Italian, Greek food. But the North has not had as much. As you said, you weren't finding as many people doing this work. And so I'm wondering I'm wondering, why do you think that is? Because there are lots of people from Sweden and Norway and Denmark in this country. Why do you think we haven't gotten that ethnicity cooking in our culture here yet?
Well, I guess we don't have a reputation for like the French, right? With a very classic, sophisticated cuisine, or Italian, it's not in the same vein. It's been very much based on home cooking and very limited ingredients. Of course, that has changed over the last few decades with the new Nordic cuisine. You see all these Nordic chefs come up, and you have these 3 Michelin stars, but it's just been only recently, really. So what I call, it's Norway and Sweden and Denmark. For that part, maybe Denmark is a little bit more sophisticated. Oh, don't
start that.
Don't give them any ideas. No, but we are sort of more country of peasant food, and it's like it doesn't really look appetizing. Like if you see many people like posting pictures of their dinner, you're like, what is this? Boiled potatoes and like sauerkraut and like some sort of. It doesn't look very appealing. So I think that, but it's tasty, right? So we have this like thing of potato dumpling, but it just to my husband, it just looked like a gray, like creamy mess, and it's like it's not very appealing. But again, there you have it. It's like the memories that just jog this, like, oh my gosh, I start to salivate just thinking about this. Does it look appealing? No. So my whole thing was to make it look good too, and I think that's what the new Nordic has done. It's like really kind of sophisticated, the sort of approach to the classic traditional dishes. So I think we're still very new in that vein, and that's why it hasn't been sort of as caught on as much as the other cuisines from around the world.
So you have classes, you have them online classes. Are they all virtual, or are they like you just download the classes and take them whenever you want? Both?
So on arcticgrub.com/shop, you'll find a list of all the cooking classes. Either they're pre-recorded or I already filmed them live, and you can purchase them and instantly download them. And then if you get on my email list, you will get access to information when I do live classes. I just did a live class over the weekend called Fjord to Fork, actually, Norwegian summer cooking, where we did this gorgeous raspberry tart. I showed how to make a vegan vanilla custard, which sometimes people have trouble with. And then making, of course, raspberries are in season now. And then these lovely fiskekok with their fish patties, showing you some secret ingredients to making them really delicious and flavorful. But when you're also on my list, you get access to special, sort of coupons and things like that you can use. I have seasonal bundles. I'm huge, as you probably noticed by now, fan of seasonal cooking. So in my seasonal bundles, you'll get exclusive recipes that are not available on my blog or in my previous classes. So they're just, in these bundles. And then, of course, you can also access my 2 bread courses. I have one called the Flatbreads of Norway, and then I have one on whole grain breads, because that's really what I've heard a lot of people miss when they move from, even from Germany, but from Northern Europe. They come here and the breads are like, what is this? It's like white and there's no nutrients, but I teach you how to make them. These are very simple to make, but they're multi-grain, multi-seeded, and they're delicious. And, it's not something you can get in any baker or any store in the US. So I decided, let's teach people how to bake these so you can enjoy fabulous Nordic breads at home. So those 2 are both available online as well. And those can be instantly accessed once you purchase the course.
That just sounds mouthwatering. What would you say people should begin with this panoply? If someone's never heard of you before, they just tuned in, they listen, and they're like, well, where do I begin? Where would they begin?
Yeah, I think that what I want to make, I want to make all my classes easy for people. I don't want you to have a lot of knowledge in advance to do this. So I try to make it as easy as possible. So I would say any of them, depending on where or what type of Nordic food you're interested in. Most of it is Norwegian, but like I mentioned before, I have this trilogy bundles. So I have 3 classes on, say, Norway versus Sweden. I have another 3 on Norway versus Denmark. That can give you a good introduction to what are the differences between Norwegian food and Swedish food, and look at how similar they are. And we think they're so different, but I always say we're more alike than we're different. So I like to showcase that in these bundles. And then, of course, the Iceland versus Norway too. And these are recipes that I find very hard to find here available in English. So it's a really fun thing to do. I also, depending on whether you have a sweet tooth or you want to do savory cooking, there's a bunch of them, but I don't really think there's a hierarchy of where. That's the beauty of it. It's like whatever catches your eye, go for it. And if you have any questions, I'm always available to my students. So maybe not at 3 a.m, but email me, and after 24 hours, I'm happy to help with any questions you have. I really love all my students. I love all my followers. It's very personal to me. I do this mostly for fun, but I started this because I felt like there wasn't enough about Norwegian food per se, and Scandinavian in general. But whenever you heard Scandinavian, you heard Swedish meatballs, and there's so much more to Nordic food than that. So that was my whole idea for starting this up.
It's wonderful. Well, I think I'm going to make sure we have links to all your page, arcticgrub.com, to your Instagram. And you said that you've got something prepared for people who are listeners that they can download. So I'll have the link to that in our page. And I was just thinking, I noticed that you live north of Manhattan. I have 2 daughters that live in Westchester County. And when I was there walking around, they both have new babies this year. And I was walking around and I thought they were raspberries, but they're wine berries that were everywhere, just dripping. I was thinking, after I was looking at your page, I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I had known about this to make, is it saf? Is that what you call what do you call the sauce?
So it's a kind of like a concentrated juice, right? So this is what we use to preserve our berries throughout the winter. So we would make it and really, really strong, and then you fill up water and you add some ice in it, and you have a nice, refreshing drink with your dinner. And there is actually, it was funny you mentioned it, because there's a special equipment, like a double boiler of sorts with some sort of concoction on top. I have never been able to find it here. I don't think they have it, but I wanted to buy that next time I'm back in Norway, because we're just renovating my childhood home now. So it's going to be ready in the fall, and I'm hoping to go back in too long to get one of those pots. And I want to do a class on how to make soft. So stay tuned.
And what does the top do? Does it strain the seeds, or does
it strains the seeds, and then there's sort of like a handle that presses it. It's a very it looks kind of funny, but it's and somewhat simple, but it does what it's supposed to do, I guess, and in a much more efficient way. And they've upgraded this equipment since my mom. I remember my mom had a really old one, but I couldn't find it now when I was looking in the basement. So I think I'm gonna have to buy an updated one. But those are little fun things, and I always give resources to my students, like whatever I use. If there's any specialty ingredients or equipment, I try not to use any specialty ingredient that you can't find here in the US, because most of my students are American. I actually have a bunch of Australian ones too, funnily enough. I mean, there's a huge Nordic crowd in Australia that seem to love what I do. So I'm grateful for that. But I try not to do too much. But if you are looking for something, I can certainly help out with that if you're interested.
That's marvelous. Sunny Gandara, it's very, very nice of you to make time for us here at Vedge Your Best. We're going to have all the links to all your work for all our listeners. And thank you for what you're doing. I hope you'll come back if you've got something else special to talk about.
I would love to. Thank you again for having me. It's been a blast.
So what did you think of Sunny Gandara from ArcticGrub.com? I'm excited to have you explore Sunny's recipes and classes on ArcticGrub.com, because Sunny is much more than a passionate enthusiast, right? Sunny's a highly trained chef. She has really taken on this challenge to translate the best of her food culture for people who simply don't want to consume animals. And Sunny has a link for you, my Vedge Your Bestie, that's going to be in the show notes, but it's pretty easy, right? It's arcticgrub.com/Vedge Your Best. arcticgrub.com Vedge Your Best. And you're going to see a special offer for Vedge Your Best listeners. And at arcticgrub.com, you'll also find Sunny Gandara's recipes, her cooking classes, gorgeous photos, cultural notes, travel ideas. And I want Sunny back on this pod when she has her childhood home ready for guests and students to learn her approach to NorVegan cuisine, immersed in that region of Northwest Norway. So you can also find Sunny at Arctic Grub on Instagram, and I think you'll be inspired there. You'll stay up to date with what Sunny's up to, and you'll find everything at arcticgrub.com. And I'm wondering how you have translated your traditions, your family, your culture or work into a vegan or plant-based direction, because that's really a fascinating topic for me, and I know for a lot of the listeners here. Is it something you're still working on? Is it something you're feeling some trepidation about still? Let's talk about that exact subject here. Let me know what you think. And we do it, I think, by getting out there in the real world and remembering to just Vedge Your Best. Vedge Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Vedge Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and Vedge Your Best.